Whenever you are. Okay, if you have your Bibles, please open to Matthew Chapter 5. Can you read yet, Jennifer, or no? Are your eyes...
They came in, but they didn't have the prism in the left eye, so they had to go back.
Okay. Let's go ahead and pray, and we'll read. Dear Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to study your word. We ask for your Spirit to be here to help us to just understand how people in history have worked out how you have acted in history, Lord. And we pray, Lord, that we can learn from their mistakes, and we can also learn from their strengths and understand that we stand on the shoulders of people who are way more intelligent than we are and who had way more time to study than we do, Lord. So we pray that we would be humble even in our corrections. And so we say this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so Matthew chapter 5, and I want to read just a couple sections out of here. And the reason why is we're actually going to be getting in now into some of the issues about how different people have interpreted the Old Testament and why. And we've been looking up to this point at covenant theology, and now we're going to be getting into the meat of covenant theology, the real substantial portion of covenant theology, and then why they interpret some of the passages the way they interpret, or why they have some of the views the way they have. So if you look at verse 21 in Matthew chapter 5, it says, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to the judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to the judgment, and whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to hellfire.'" Now move down to verse 27. It says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." In verse 31, it says, "It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife except on the grounds of sexual immorality makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." In verse 33, it says, "Again, you have heard that it was said of those of old, 'You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn.' But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the king." Skip down to verse 38. "You have heard that it was said, 'An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.' But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Verse 44 says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven." All right, so how to interpret the Old Testament, or how does the New Testament interpret the Old Testament, or how have different systems looked at this? Not necessarily this in particular, but this does feed into this. So what we looked at last week is we talked about covenant theology, and we talked about two of their major covenants. What was the two covenants in covenant theology? Redemption. And what's that? Give me a definition of the covenant of redemption.
The eternal covenant.
Okay. Of what?
Between the Father and the Son.
Okay, between the Father and the Son. And okay, and then what's the next one?
Works.
The covenant of works. And what's the covenant of works?
God made it between Adam and himself.
Yes. And did Adam keep the covenant of works? Negative. He failed that. What was the condition of the covenant of works?
That he didn't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Right. And if he refrained long enough, he would have, according to the theory, he would have entered into a state of immortality. But he didn't keep that. He broke that covenant. And therefore, in covenant theology, which is one way in which people have looked at how God has unfolded his plan in history, God had to make a new covenant. And that's what we get to when we come to our third covenant. So the third covenant, in which the entire rest of the Bible is worked out, and we saw this in Genesis 3:15, is the covenant of grace. Okay, the covenant of grace. Now you must understand that in covenant theology, this will framework the rest of the Bible. The absolute rest of the Bible is frameworked by this. And what they mean by the covenant of grace is that God has now only worked in one covenant that is unfolding throughout history. Okay, so think of it like a map, right? A map, like if you take a map and it's all folded up together, okay? It's all folded up together. And if I unfold it, right, I've really added nothing essentially new, have I? It's just the same thing, just more of it, just a different substance of, or a different unfolding of it. Now, of course, the two pieces aren't the same, but they're inextricably connected together, okay? They're inextricably connected together. And then you get the next portion of it, and then you get the next portion of it, then you get the next portion of it. But really what you have is, in the covenant of grace, is one unbroken covenant. Now, does anybody immediately see a problem with this? If there's only ever been one unbroken covenant throughout history, then what can anybody see a potential problem with this idea?
Well, it depends on what we mean by unbroken. So unbroken on God's part.
Okay, so I mean unbroken. So here's the second thing about it. Let's say, so God has only had one unbroken covenant. Yes, unbroken on God's part. The second part of this would be that because there's only one covenant of God, and I mean one covenant. There's only ever been one covenant from Genesis 3:15 all the way to the end of history. And because of that, God has had one unbroken plan of redemption. Okay. Does anybody have a problem with the fact that God's only ever had one unbroken covenant? What might be a problem with that?
Well, the Mosaic covenant.
Okay. Does not the Bible call other things other covenants, right? Then we have what's called the Old Covenant and the New Covenant, right? So if we have the Old Covenant and we have the New Covenant, then how in the world can we only have one unbroken covenant, right? How can we only have one thing that unfolds throughout history? That's going to be a weak spot for them. But this framework frames everything that they believe, that God's only had one unbroken covenant. Now, this part I disagree with. This part I agree with. He's only ever had one unbroken plan of redemption. God has not changed his mind. And this is where the other school of thought comes in to play, and that is dispensationalism. Dispensationalism believes that God has had different covenants and different plans. These people say there's only been one covenant and one plan. Okay, so this leads us to some very interesting things. This leads us to the fact that when you get to these words of Jesus here, what Jesus is doing is not giving us a new moral law. What Jesus is doing, the best thing that Jesus can do, is either rightly explain Moses to us or kind of expand on Moses. So it's not necessarily new. So when you get to the New Testament and you're living under the New Covenant, they really believe that this is how they put it in their books. This is where they separate from biblical language. So instead of saying a new covenant, they say a new administration. Of the same unbroken covenant. So when they say a new administration, here's one of the things that they believe, that the 10 Commandments Our sorry, my hand is hurting me. I actually don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to keep my job because my hand seizes up on me all the time these days. Yeah, really. Yeah, it does it more because I got to hold a hose all day, on all the time. It's just getting worse and worse. So my hand's kind of. No, it's really just like right here, where it just kind of cramps up, and you'll see my pinky kind of poke in, and then it kind of pokes. That part pokes out like that, and that part pokes in. It's kind of crazy. So sorry about not being able to write real well here. Not that I ever write well anyway. But the Ten Commandments are God's unchanging moral law. Unchanging moral law. So if you turn over again to Hebrews chapter 8, sorry. And it says in verse 13, in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete. And what is becoming obsolete is growing old and ready to vanish away. And they'll say, okay, what's growing old and ready to vanish away? Yeah, that's the old ceremonial aspects of the covenant. But that's not the Ten Commandments. That's the old, maybe civil aspects, but that's not the Ten Commandments. So it can't be the Ten Commandments. So they'll say, yes, but that's not the Ten Commandments. And so even the fourth commandment, they believe, transferred to Sunday, because this is God, in their view, this is God's unchanging, highest moral law. So Jesus does not come and add to this or take away from this. The best he can do is explain it better than everybody else has explained it. Kind of give you a new spin on it. But he's not giving you anything other than the Ten Commandments. He's not giving you anything new. Turn to Colossians Chapter 2. And verse 16. It says, therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in question of food, drink, or with regard to festival, new moon, or a Sabbath. These are the shadow of the things to come, but the substance is Christ. Now, because they believe in one unchanging covenant that's been stretched out from the beginning, like a map that's been folded out, they'll say, yeah, but that's the Jewish Sabbath. That's not the Christian Sabbath, you see? So how you have your presuppositions will determine how you read your Bible. It will determine how you read your Bible. They see it everywhere. They say, yes, of course the Jewish Sabbath of Saturday is out, but the Christian Sabbath of Sunday is still in place. So this verse just doesn't apply to the Christian Sabbath. Now they believe that the Christian Sabbath, they have their reasons for believing this. I mean, obviously they're not dumb. Some of the smartest people have been covenant theologians, and we depend a great deal of our theology upon them. People like R.C. Sproul and Greg Bahnsen. I mean, sit down. Even today, James White is a covenant theologian. Who else would be? I mean, you name it. Almost everybody's a covenant theologian. Now, James White is a covenant Baptist theologian, which is slightly different than a Presbyterian. But they would still believe that that Sunday is the Sabbath. It's just changed from Saturday to Sunday, and now that's the Christian Sabbath. So when he's talking here about it being a shadow, he'd say, "Oh, of course, that's the Old Testament version of this." So how do they look at the law? Now, again, I'm being critical of this, but you must understand that they have three divisions of the law. Okay? So when they're reading the law and they're reading Moses, the first division that they're reading is moral. And there's the 10 Commandments. The second division of the law is civil. So this is like, you put this person to death, or this person has to pay a certain amount, whatever. Okay, and the third division of the law is ceremonial. So when they come to the verse that says one's fading away and the other one's coming in, when they divide the law up like this, what do they think is fading away?
The civil and the ceremonial.
The civil and the ceremonial, but not the moral. You can't have the moral ever fade away. Am I right? I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? I mean, it's still wrong to kill today, right? I mean, you would still want capital punishment. And then, we'll get into 3 uses of the law. So these are the 3 divisions of the law. Now, I also want to bring your attention to what they say about the 3 uses of the law. They're not the same, okay? So I'm going to write it over here. The 3 uses of the law. Okay? The 3 uses of the law is to reveal sin, and that's to bring the person to Christ. So you tell them that, like the Ray Comfort thing, or have you ever, what does he do? He takes them through what? The 10 Commandments, right? How does Ray Comfort evangelize? What does he say? Are you a good person?
Yes, if they're a good person, well, yeah, have you ever told a lie?
Right?
What does that make you?
A liar, right? And that's breaking the 9th commandment. And have you ever stolen anything? That's broken the 7th commandment. No, the 7th commandment is don't commit adultery. 8th commandment, don't steal. So, 8, or is it 6? I can't remember. Yeah. Well, you see, he switches. See, Ray Comfort's is a great evangelist, but he's not the best a theologian, so he kind of switches between the New Testament and the Old Testament there. But he does it based on the fact that he grew up in an era of this is how you think about the Old Testament, that you don't think of it as something discarded, but you think of it as something that you keep as much of. So it reveals sin, and the second use of the law is civil. Okay. So that's still the second use of the law is still for today, just like this is, except for in some of the cultural emanations, you wouldn't use it. So for example, what would be an example of a cultural emanation of the civil law? Can you think of an example? What's the one that people always use?
We don't stone people anymore, but we'll find them.
Okay, all right, that's a good idea. That's a good crossover. Okay, we should put a parapet around our roof, right? They used to do that in the Old Testament.
Yes, we should.
If you're up on your roof and you entertain guests up there, or if you sleep up on your roof, you should have a parapet up there. But today we would say things like, well, make sure you take every precaution to keep things safe. You have laws that don't allow you to keep poison for toddlers on the bottom shelf, kind of a thing. So there were other, I guess not poison for toddlers.
Sorry, I had to go there.
The other use, no, that's a good one, good catch. Another example is, remember with the axe head? The axe head's loose, and it's loose, and it flies off and kills somebody.
Yes.
You're blood guilty. But if you didn't know, you're not blood guilty. Okay, so in the Presbyterian and Reformed Baptist view, it's not a 1-for-1, but it is a template. You kind of look at it and you can kind of see what God wants for society. So you would say things like, well, if your car's brakes are not doing well, and you know that they're not doing well, and you hit somebody, and you've known for a while that they're not doing well, and you hit somebody, your price, the price you pay should be more severe than if you didn't hit somebody. All right, so sin reveal, and then the civil use, and then the third use of the law is for Christian sanctification. What do we mean by sanctification? What did we say sanctification means?
Becoming more Christ-like.
Becoming more Christ-like. And so what they believe is that this reveals sin, you get saved, right? This helps us in our society. We should look at the laws as at least a template to some degree to how to run our government. And if you're a Christian, you should read your Old Testament, you should read the law, and then you should change your life as a result of it. I should be able to take you to places in the law and go, see, you should live more like the law says, okay? So these are the three divisions of the law. Now, the biggest problem that people have that has come across is how much of the civil law is kept. Okay, how much of the civil law is kept? And this is where theonomy, we talked about theonomy before, this is where theonomy comes into play. Because what they do is they don't really make a distinction between the civil use of the law and the moral value of the law. They say those two are kind of one and the same thing, and you should keep as much as possible. Now that is the idea of Presbyterianism and Reformed Baptist in general. The idea is, you see, because this is the highest point, that when you get to Jesus and the new covenant, are you going to discard more or are you going to keep more? What's going to be your plan if you're in this system? What's going to be your plan? Are you going to discard or are you going to keep? You're going to keep as much as possible, right? You're going to keep as much as possible. And the idea is you keep as much as possible unless you really, really can't. And you really try to fight to keep as much as possible, but unless you really can't. Okay, so this also creates some interesting aspects as well. This is why, and we've talked about this before, but I'll briefly go through it. In
Quick question.
Yes.
So would they feel inclined to keep, like the Old Testament, as far as like the civil aspect of it, would they feel more inclined to hang on to that, even with the different, like today's society changes, like the civil, like, you know, we used to stone people, but now we don't.
No.
Do they have a conflict with that, or are they willing to like back off of?
Firing squad instead of stones.
Yes, they would say that
Yeah.
you would temper it as much as possible with new covenant grace. So you would look at it and you'd go, okay, we can kill them, but we're not going to stone them to death. We'll be more merciful than that. So now the theonomists wouldn't, because the theonomists blur the line between the moral law and the civil law. So they say the moral and civil should be almost one. So the penalties given in the Old Testament for crimes should be kept as much as possible. So, yeah, were you going to say something?
I'm thinking, but no.
Okay. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, I was just wondering how they would justify, wanting to continue to do things the old way when society is very,
So
very much dictated it. No, this is how we do it.
right.
So
They would.
odds with
They would be put at odds with a lot of society. They would just be put at odds with a lot of society. They would. This is part of what's called the Reconstruction Movement within theonomy, was a political movement that is an attempt to change the laws to reflect the Bible more. So they say theonomy versus autonomy. What do you want, God's law, or do you not want God's law? So they want to be a Christianized society. That's what they want to be. But that's not all covenant theology. That's one brand of covenant theology.
extremist.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing a lot in regards to the civil is, have we even asked the question, with whom is the new covenant made? But what I mean by that is this. I hear some radio show hosts and various other, and how America, that God has a covenant with America.
Yeah.
I go back and I read the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't see God making any covenant with any specific nation,
Mm-mm.
but taking a people for himself out of every tribe, tongue, and nation.
Right.
So, I don't see much political things going on in the book of Acts. Now, I'm not saying that that's the end all of it, but I see the emphasis on the gospel and the changing of the heart. And if the society gets better because the gospel went out and changed people's hearts, that's one thing. But I just don't see a covenant with a particular nation, government, or that kind of thing.
There isn't. You're right, there isn't. But because there's only ever been one unchanging covenant, then the covenant with Moses for a government is still in force, or still can be enforced. You see that presupposition plays into that severely.
And how about their eschatology, especially if they're post-millennial?
Well, okay, so in covenant theology, you can be pre-mill, post-mill, amill. Okay, you can be all three. Does everybody know what those terms mean, or does not everybody know what those terms mean? If you need me to back down and explain that, I'd be happy to.
You got a second to do that?
Yeah, I got all the time in the world here. I got a good 45 minutes. Okay, this is going to play into how you view the whole Bible, especially when we get to our next system, which is dispensationalism. But do you see that if you believe that there's one unchanging covenant of grace, that's going to affect how you live today? That's going to really affect how you live. It's going to affect what you think about society. It's going to affect how you think about the church. So let me get two more points, and I'm going to go to this eschatological view as well. Okay, so the second thing that this plays into is how you view the sacraments. We talked about this before. Okay, the sacraments are what in the New Testament? Baptism and what? Communion. Okay, so turn to Colossians again, if you're still at Colossians. Now, a lot of people have actually accused, and I don't know if it's true or not, Colossians Chapter 2, once again. Look, I don't know if this is necessarily true. This is an accusation, though, okay? This is an accusation, and the accusation is this, that one of the reasons they came up with covenant theology was to keep infant baptism without believing in the Catholic view of baptism or the Lutheran view of baptism. See, if you have covenant theology in place, then you can justify the baptism of infants much more easily. Okay, so if you look at chapter 2 and verse 10, it says, "And you have been filled in him who is the head and the rule of authority. In him you were circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the flesh by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the powerful working of God." So right there, he connects baptism.
With believers.
Well, no, he connects baptism with what? With what covenant sign of the old covenant? Circumcision. It says, look in verse 10 again. It says, "And you have been filled in him who is the head and rule over the authority. In him also you were circumcised with the circumcision made without hands, by putting on the body of the flesh." So he's saying that the true circumcision is baptism. And this is where they get the idea. Now, if you're going to keep as much of the Old Testament as possible, in the Old Testament, what was the sign of the Old Testament? Circumcision. Was that given to only believers or believers and their children? Believers and their children, right? Okay, so did circumcision save anybody?
No.
Did the Jew ever think that the circumcision saved anybody? No, it just meant that you were part of this community now, right? That's all it meant, is that you were part of this community. Yes. So in the New Testament, they say, oh, we don't baptize everybody, but if you're going to be part of this community, because the Old Testament is so much like the New Testament, it's almost one and the same, then the New Testament sign is baptism. And so we baptize our infants. It doesn't save them. We're not saying it saves them. They don't get, some of them do, but they're saying it doesn't save them. But are babies mentioned in the New Testament either way? No, never mentioned, not once. And they would see the absence of what's the word I'm looking for? The absence is like a good sign that this is what it means. Because, I mean, wouldn't they have discussed it at some point? But you have a bunch of Jews who are used to circumcising their babies. So now they're all coming over and baptizing. And it never comes up. I mean, why wouldn't they just baptize their babies, right? That means they're part of the church. They're part of that visible community. And if you go to a Presbyterian church, that's what they say it means. It doesn't mean, it's not like a Baptist church. In a Baptist church, when you go down into the water and you come up, what you're saying is, I am saved. You're not saying that makes you saved, but you're saying, I got saved. That's the sign that I'm saved. It's a personal sign that I'm saved, right? I've been saved. This is the sign that I'm saved. They're saying that no, that's not the sign that you're saved. This is just the sign of the covenant. It's just the sign. It's just the outward sign of the reality of what God's doing. What God did in the Old Testament was he looked forward to Christ, and now in the New Testament, we're in Christ. So it puts you in the community of Christ, and then you're raised differently than the world. So they baptize their infants for that. Now, Reformed Baptists don't. They just cut it short there. They say, well, look, I'm up to you to that point, but after that, I'm not there. It's believer's baptism. So this is why Presbyterians look at Reformed Baptists and they say things like, well, you'll get there. You've heard James White talk about this before, about Presbyterians who are his friends talk to him, say, oh, you'll get there. You'll get reformed one of these days. You'll reform yourself up. All right, so here's what I want you to see. All this is built on a house of cards. It's all built on a house of cards. If you have this covenant in place, then yes, these things are true. But the truth of the matter is there was no covenant given in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Turn to Genesis chapter 3 and verse 15, as we looked at this before. So maybe I've even convinced you. So, oh, maybe we should baptize children. Whatever.
There are some strong arguments they use.
They do have some. So I believed in infant baptism. I think I've told you all this. I believed in infant baptism at one time. And I don't believe in infant baptism anymore. I was strong into covenant theology. And the reason why I stopped believing in infant baptism is because I stopped believing in covenant theology. Okay? Now there are aspects of covenant theology that are for sure right. For sure right. But the foundation of it is completely fabricated. Completely fabricated. All right, look at verse 14. First of all, is there a covenant here given? A covenant to Adam about anything? Who is he talking to?
Satan.
He's talking to Satan. He's not saying anything to Adam. Is there anything about a covenant here at all? Look at verse 14. But the Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and above all beasts of the field, and on your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Is there a covenant with Adam? No. There's a promise to Satan.
Yeah, you can get smooshed.
Right, and this is part of what covenant theology that I believe in, that God's only ever had one unchanging plan. There's never been more than one plan of God. But to say because there's never been ever only more than one plan of God is different than saying there's never ever only been one covenant of God. Okay, that's not true. The old covenant is not the same as the new covenant. The Abrahamic covenant is not the same as the Mosaic covenant. And the Mosaic covenant is not the same as the new covenant. It's not the same as the covenant made with David. They're not the same covenants. They're different covenants. And because there's different covenants, I would say the idea of covenant, new covenant, expresses more discontinuity than continuity. Okay? when you have a new covenant, you're going to find a lot of discontinuity under a new covenant. Because covenant means if one covenant's out and the other covenant's in, that means the whole arrangement of that system is out. The arrangement is gone. And Jesus said, I come to make a new covenant. This isn't simply a renewed covenant, but this is a new covenant. Look,
we couldn't keep the old one.
We couldn't keep the old
It
one.
was impossible.
Right.
The book of Galatians over and over again.
Well, Jesus kept it. Jesus kept it. Okay. So he fulfilled that covenant, and that plays a part in kind of how he is able now to have a new heaven and a new earth. Okay, that's how it plays into that, because he won back what Adam lost. Okay, he won back from Satan what Adam lost. So Jesus kept that, and he becomes the new covenant administrator. But it's a new covenant. It's not the same as the old covenant. Turn back to Hebrews chapter 8 again. Let me just stress this with you here. In verse 7, for if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second. Okay? Now, I don't know what the NIV says. You have an NIV. What does it say?
Let's see.
Verse
For if there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, no place would be sought for another.
Okay, all right. No place would be sought for another. Now, the covenant here obviously is not talking about the covenant of grace. It's talking about the covenant made with Moses. This is what he's talking about, the old covenant. And he's saying, hey, if that covenant had been faultless, that's a harsh word, by the way. Okay, faultless. That's without fault. Okay, if it had been faultless, there would be no occasion to look for a second. For he finds fault with them when he says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers on the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of Egypt. For they did not continue in my covenant, and so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. And then it goes on with the idea of the covenant. He's saying that one covenant is fading away and another covenant has been made new. Now, don't misunderstand me, and don't misunderstand what the Bible is saying either. Each stage of this has been progressively laid out. Each stage of God's plan, including the old covenant, was purposeful. But you have to ask yourself, what was the purpose of that covenant? And we must distinguish also between the Old Covenant and the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the Bible, those 66 books we call the Bible. Okay, but in that Bible, those 39 books, you have a document in there that lays out conditions that if you keep those conditions, you'll live. And if you don't keep those conditions, you'll die. Right? I mean, that was the whole idea behind Moses. And you're like, I can't do it. We can't do it. God says you should be able to do it. Well, we should be able to do it if we were perfect, but we're not. So he says, I got to get rid of that one. Now I've got a new covenant. The new covenant is not just a simple repackaging of the old covenant. It is a new deal. It's a brand new deal. All right? Okay, so in covenant, yes?
Would you say the fault was this? In that it gave us such high standards that we were not able to. Not as a fault of God, but as the fallenness of ourselves.
Right.
So in that sense, there was fault in the covenant that we couldn't live up to it, even though we were commanded to, because God did not drop his standards at the fall. He kept his standards. This is my standards. But now that you're fallen, you can't do it.
Yeah. Now that you're fallen, you can't do it.
Because of the presence of sin.
Well, okay, so Yes, but you see, part of what he goes through in the book of Hebrews is the idea that the high priest has to be replaced because he keeps dying. Right? So that's part of the problem with the old covenant. This is part of the reason why it can't ever get us to eschaton, why it can't ever get us to the end days, why it can't ever get us to anything glorious. Because even under that system, the high priest is always going to die. There's always going to be a turnover. So it can't ever get you to where God originally planned with Adam.
Right.
Okay.
And there were periods of time too that you had no coverage because they only did the sacrifices so many times a year. And it was like in that off time, there was no longer a sacrifice for you.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, so there is a fault in that right there.
Well, yeah, in the sense that it can't perfect you. In other words, another idea is the blood of bulls and goats can't perfect you. So I think that's what it means by the fault in that covenant. It's not necessarily a fault with God because God planned it that way to show you that even under this covenant you can't keep it. You can't keep the idea of it. Okay.
We expose the sin that's within every single one of us, so that way we acknowledge the fact that we can't do it.
Yes. Right. Yes. That we cannot. We are dependent upon another. And this is why, I don't mind using the Old Testament law as a means of showing people that they need Christ. However, the New Covenant law does that too. Jesus raises the stakes. He says, don't hate in your heart. Don't. Moses refrained your hand, which nobody could do. But Jesus refrained your heart, which you realize, I got a bigger problem than what I do externally. It's what I do internally. It's my thought life. And so,
It goes down to capture every thought.
so Jesus comes and he sets the standard in the real issue, which was the heart. And not that some of that wasn't in the Old Testament as well, because it was in the Old Testament, but it's emphasized in a new way in the New Testament. And it is a new covenant. It's not just a repackaging of one unbroken covenant. Okay, the other thing that I want you to see about covenant theology, this is the last thing, then I'll talk about last day stuff. The other thing I wanted you to see about the covenant theology, and this will bring us into it, this is the part where I agree with it, because they have one unfolding covenant and one unfolding plan, and that is the church is is the new Israel. The church is the new Israel, okay? And I wholeheartedly agree with them on that, which I talked about, I think, 2 Sundays ago in church, about how the church is the new Israel. More on that in a minute. I'm sorry, my hand is just killing me. I'm having a really hard time writing here. All right, so was there a question then about, did you want to do the question of eschatology in this?
Well, as far as the differences, as far as how that, because I asked the question about does their eschatology, how they do the end.
Some people do. All right.
Does that affect the way they look at the covenants? Because in postmillennialism, they think that the world is going to become Christianized before the return of Christ.
Right.
Therefore, if the world is Christianized, how do we conduct civil laws?
That is exactly the idea.
Right.
So the idea of postmillennialism is the idea that the world will be Christianized prior to the return of Christ. All right, let me go through the next system, which will take us into next week here, and that is dispensationalism. Now, this is the exact opposite of covenant theology, is dispensationalism. And we're actually going to get into more eschatology with dispensationalism, because dispensationalism is an eschatology. So instead of thinking that God has had, now dispensationalism has had various forms over the years. So let me give you those various forms. The first is classic.
Is that Darby?
Yes, Darby. All the way up to the pretty much like the 1950s, okay? And then actually classic, we'll do it this way. Classic gave birth to what's called revised dispensationalism. And then classic also gave birth to what's called hyper dispensationalism. And actually hyper gave birth to another school called ultra dispensationalism. And then this gave birth to another form of dispensationalism called progressive dispensationalism. So you have one unbroken plan with one unbroken covenant, right? In covenant theology. Dispensationalism says no, you've got a bunch of different covenants and a bunch of different plans that God has tried and to work out over the years. And then he didn't. Well, the smarter ones will say that they failed on purpose. But this is part and parcel.
It's still part of one big plan.
You could, and this is where you start getting more this way, more this side of it. This side starts getting into different plans and different ways of even getting saved, because God's had different plans. And you get into hyper and ultra. Then today you're saved by grace through faith, but in the Old Testament you're saved by the law. So these people never believed it this way, never believed it. But these people took ideas from here and went further. All right, well, what's dispensationalism? Well, let's start with the name. Obviously, dispensations. Now, you can believe in dispensations and not be a dispensationalist. Let me just say that right up front. You can believe in dispensations and not be a dispensationalist. Obviously, we believe in dispensations. The time of the garden was a unique period, right? It wasn't the same as the time after the garden. The time of Moses was not the same as the time today. But the question is what do they mean by dispensations? Okay, what does a dispensationalist mean by dispensationalist? So I'll give you the classic definition of what a dispensation is. This is one element of what it means to be a dispensationalist. Okay, one big element of what it means. So asking what a dispensationalist is asking, like, what's water? Water is H2O, right? But if I find hydrogen over here and oxygen over here, I don't have water yet. They have to come together in a unique way. And when they come together in a unique way, then you've got water. Okay, so when certain ideas come together in a unique way, you get dispensationalism. Okay, the first idea is, what's a dispensation? So a dispensation, according to dispensationalist, is when God puts man to a test and man fails that test. So that's a unique dispensation. Then he makes another test. And according to dispensationalism, classic, how many dispensations are there?
7.
Okay, 7 dispensations. There are 7 dispensations. So instead of looking at it as one unfolding like a map, like you'd go boom, and then the next part comes out, and the next part comes out, next part comes out, an unfolding thing, they look at it as a real dividing line. You could almost put it like this rather than like this. Okay, but we'll do it this way. Okay, so the first dispensation, do you know what the first dispensation is?
Garden.
Okay, it's called what? Innocence. Right? So God put man to the test, he failed the test, right? Garden, Genesis 3:15. So what's the next dispensation?
Pre-flood.
Pre-flood, do you remember the name?
The
Conscience. So that's the next dispensation. God puts man to the test. He says, okay, I'm not going to give you the law. I'm going to just let you go by your conscience. They fail the test, and God has got to make a new dispensation. And then he makes a dispensation of promise with Abraham. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Look. No, I'm sorry. Not promise. Erase that. Human government. And that goes all the way up to, because remember when he gets off the ark, what does he say? What's the covenant that he makes? He never flood the whole earth again, but then what's the one law he gives? He says you can eat it, anything you want. You see all these things, you can eat them. Does anybody remember the law he gives? Genesis chapter 9.
Was it animal sacrifice?
It's the power of the sword. He says, from now on, if anybody kills anybody, you're to put them to death because they're made in God's image. So let's say human government, And then that ends badly for them at the Tower of Babel, right? Then he's got to come down and he's got to separate them out. Okay, and after human government, then we have promise with Abraham, okay? But how does that not get fulfilled? Why is that a test that's terminated?
Is that because of Ishmael?
No, this goes all the way up to Egypt. Because he never takes the promised land. They end up all slaves in Egypt. They end up all slaves in Egypt. So he's got to terminate that plan now. Now he's got to go to the law, right?
Moses.
Right, and that's the law of Moses. And that terminates with Christ. And then he gives, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, then the church age. And that's going to end badly because we're going to get the Antichrist coming. People are going to go through the 7-year tribulation, all that. And then after the church age, then you get the millennium. How's that end? Everybody read Genesis chapter, not Genesis, but Revelation chapter 20. What happens there?
Satan's released off his chain and he makes war against us.
And he makes war, and then after that you go into the eternal state. Okay, and there's your, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so 7 dispensations. So this was a way.
I would argue that that's still part of the same plan. Is just key benchmarks within the plan to show that how flawed we are.
Yes. And you're getting close to what's called progressive. Let me give you another element here, okay, that kind of makes them separate. So what they believe is because these things are in different dispensations, that the covenants given at the different dispensations are bound up in that dispensation. Okay, they're bound up in that dispensation. So the covenant given to Abraham is not applicable to the church. The covenant given during the time of law to David, I'm going to make a kingdom for you, David, is not applicable to the church. This is why they believe, you could argue the same, but classic and revised don't. Because they believe these are separate dispensations, separate units, that the covenants contained within these units are also separate. So remember, covenant theology is one continuous covenant, one continuous plan. These are different covenants, different plans. Okay, that's how they do that. And this is why you'll see the church in parentheses, okay, in their plan when they fold it open and they look at it. This was kind of unique to dispensationalism, but the idea that was also unique in dispensationalism was that because of this, and this is both classic and revised, is that God has 2 peoples. A heavenly people and an earthly people. And then later dispensationalists came along and said this is the church and this is Israel. Okay, the church in Israel. So God has 2 plans of redemption at work, according to dispensationalism. Not one plan of redemption, but 2. He is making the heavenly people, the church, to live with him in heaven. And he is making the earthly people, Israel during the time of tribulation, and the people who survived the tribulation, who were faithful, they live down here on planet Earth forever. And in classic dispensationalism, these 2 never meet. You're in heaven in a new body, forever up in heaven, and dispensationalists and Israel down here forever on a new earth. You never meet. Okay, so there are
Keep the Jews on there.
2 plans of redemption. 2 plans of redemption. Now also, so 2 peoples with 2 different plans of 2 destinies, 2 different plans. This is still classic dispensationalism, by the way. The other thing that happened was due to the fact that God still has to work with Israel, there has to be a time where he takes the church off the earth. Okay, because God apparently can't multitask. So there's this 7-year tribulation. There's a 7-year tribulation in which all classic dispensationalists, and this was a real uniqueness of Darby when he came along with this, and that the church, this had never been heard in the church before, that the church was raptured off the earth. And the church is up here for these 7 years. Now, during these 7 years of tribulation, this is where Revelation chapter 4 through the end of chapter 19, all the way through the end of chapter 19 happened down here in the 7-year tribulational period. That's classic dispensationalism. Okay, now, have you ever read a verse that says that the church will be taken off the earth?
There's not a single one.
Not a single one. Have you ever read a verse about infants being baptized? Not a single one. You see, it matters how you believe the Old and New Testament relate to each other. Because if you believe the Old and New Testament relate to each other in a certain way, then you're going to go, of course the church has got to be taken off the earth. I know I don't got any verses, but if the church and Israel aren't the same and God still has to deal with Israel as a nation, then the church has to be taken off the earth. And the Presbyterian comes along and says, well, of course there's infant baptism. If we're keeping as much of the Old Testament as possible, and there's only been ever one unchanging plan, then of course we baptize infants. See, I see it everywhere. The household baptisms, all kinds of stuff. And these people start seeing it everywhere too. They start saying, see, he says the church and the Israel of God. And then Noah was put on the ark and he was preserved through this. And, then you start seeing it everywhere, just like when you get a new car and it's blue. And next thing you know, you see blue cars everywhere, right? It's like,
Same new car everywhere.
yeah, you see the same model or something like that. You start seeing it everywhere. That happens all the time. So during the 7-year tribulation, now, they're all premillennial as well, which means that in premillennialism means Christ comes back before the millennium. Not all premillennialists are dispensationalists, but all dispensationalists are premillennial. If you are not a premillennial, you cannot be a dispensationalist. You're out of that camp altogether. Because God still has a plan for Israel of fulfilling the promises of land and a temple. Remember you read in Genesis, or what's that verse in, not Genesis, Ezekiel about a temple. That's not you. That's not you. You're not the church. That doesn't apply to you. And God says he's going to make David his king. And he's going to put him back in the land. So all that, and he's going to make a new temple. So that none of that's fulfilled in the church. So this means that there's this 1,000-year period, and they do believe it's a literal 1,000 years, and in which when Christ comes back, he is going to reign from Jerusalem, and that they're going to rebuild the temple. That's the temple, and they're going to reinstitute animal sacrifices in the millennium. So that's kind of their dirty little secret, because they don't want people to think that. Because as soon as you say they're going to reinstitute animal sacrifices, not just here now, like the Jews want to do, I mean, I agree that. But when you say that Jesus is actually going to be in charge of animal sacrifices in the millennium, you start to go, oh, that sounds a little weird. I thought he put an end to all that, right? That sounds a little bit like heresy to me. So, and some people have accused them of that portion of being heresy. It might not be damnable heresy, but it is heresy nonetheless, in my opinion. Okay. So we'll talk more about this next week. We started 10 minutes early. Are there any questions about this? Do you want to know any more about it? Is there any? I'll take questions. No? Do you have? Okay. All right. Are you sure? Okay, so we got a few more minutes here. Okay. So, all right. Those are the two opposite extremes. Now, we'll talk next week, too, about how this applies to the law as well, because if these people believe the Old Testament law, well, then they're like the opposite of the covenantalists. They're going to keep none of it. They're going to be like, none of it. And this is why you get into things like lordship salvation in dispensationalism. In dispensationalism, there's a big fight over whether or not you even have to receive Jesus as Lord to be a Christian. You receive him as Savior, but not as Lord. Because that's all Old Testament stuff. That's not for today. The church is totally new. It's completely new. So I don't have to receive Jesus as Lord. I just have to receive him as Savior. So that plays into how they look at the Old Testament laws. All right. Ashton, would you mind praying for us?
Sure thing. Lord, thank you that we're able to come together, spend time in your word, and dig a little bit deeper and get to understand what your word actually says. I pray that we'll all have a safe trip back home, and that you'll continue to watch over us till you come back.
Amen. Amen.
Tomorrow?
Maybe.
No.